Hey guys, PainRelievers here, bringing you a dose of commentary about how strong I think the killer perks are in the game right now. You may notice there are some perks missing from this list, and that's just because there are too many perks in the game to go over in one video without making it super long, so I'm just going over what seem like the most popular perks used nowadays. So first perk is Thrill of the Hunt, and this is a pretty cool perk. It allows you to guard your totems a lot easier since it gives you a noise notification when a survivor starts working on them. However, the problem is that you do have to dedicate 2 perk slots to Hex perks in order to make use of it. Also, even if you have this perk, there's no guarantee you'll make it back to the totem before the survivor finishes cleansing it. It's probably a perk better suited for killers with high mobility that can make it back to that totem in time. So for that reason, it's going in the C tier. So next perk is Whispers, and this is a pretty awesome detection perk, especially for the early game when you don't know where any of the survivors are. Allows you to find your first survivor very easily. However, during the mid game when all the survivors are still alive, it's not very useful, and during chases it has literally no impact during a chase. So for that reason, I'm probably going to be putting it in the B tier. It can work very well on some killers, such as Spirit, who actually can't see survivors during her phase walk, and Nurse maybe. So those 2 killers, it might be like an A tier perk, but otherwise it's probably B tier for the majority of the other killers. So next perk is No One Escapes Death, and this is one of the most powerful perks in the game. Allows you to one-shot survivors at the end of the match, provided they haven't cleansed all of your totems. However, the thing is that even if they do cleanse your totems, they wasted a lot of time doing that, which gave you more time during the game to kill all of them. So either way, it's kind of a win-win. This is a very powerful perk. A lot of the time, if you hook someone when this perk is active, most survivors will choose to just exit the map and not risk getting one-shot themselves. So yeah, for that reason, it's an S tier perk. This can single-handedly win you games. So next perk is Sloppy Butcher, and as of the October 2018 mid-chapter balance changes, the Mangled status now forces survivors to heal for 20 seconds, and if they have self-care, it doubles, so it's going to take them 40 seconds to heal up after you hit them once. This is extremely powerful, even though it's only 4 seconds. I mean, 4 seconds can be the difference between catching a survivor out. It could be the difference between opening an exit gate or completing a generator. It really should not be underestimated. Also, the fact that it increases the blood trails makes it especially easy for Nurse and Spirit to track survivors. So for that reason, it's definitely going into the S tier with these new healing changes that BHVR has introduced. So next perk is Doneto Fibia, which increases the amount of time it takes for survivors to heal or repair generators. Given the healing changes I mentioned before going through, and most killers running Sloppy Butcher, I do think this perk is very strong right now. There should usually be at least one survivor who's on the hook or injured during the game, which gives the killer a lot more time. So with that being said, I do think this is a great perk for time management, and I'm probably going to be putting it in the A tier. So next perk is Tinkerer, and this perk is pretty cool. It gives you a notification when a generator is about to be completed, and also makes your terror radius 0 for 12 seconds, which is pretty scary. One of my favorite things to do with this perk is to run Overcharge and Tinkerer on Myers with unlimited tier 3. And what happens is that your terror radius goes to 0, and you can sneak up on them in tier 3 and get a one-shot very easily, and then you just kick the generator, and because it has overcharge, it gets reset like 5 or 10%, and then you can get that notification again, and then you can do that again when another survivor gets on that generator. So it's very good with certain builds, I think. Also on certain killers such as Nurse and Hillbilly and the Cannibal, who can be very scary if they find you at all. This perk, Tinkerer, is very strong on them. I think it's kind of lackluster with other killers, so I'd probably put it B tier if I could reclassify it, but I just put it A tier thinking of the potential it has on some of the killers. So still a great perk, definitely use it. Use it if you haven't tried it yet. So next perk is Strider, and this is an awesome detection perk. It makes Survivor Grunts of Pain very easy to hear. I think if you're using headphones, this perk isn't as good since headphones you can hear even survivors just breathing normally pretty easily. But if you like using speakers, this can definitely help. And also just being able to hear those grunts of pain louder can save a lot of time when it comes to searching for survivors or looking for injured ones to finish off. And especially it's great for killers who rely more on their ears, such as Nurse and Spirit who have problems tracking survivors sometimes. So for that reason, I'm probably going to put it in the A tier. It's a great perk for keeping up with survivors in chases and finishing them off. So the next perk is Spirit's Fury, and this is an awesome perk if you want to shorten your chase times, especially if you're running someone like Trapper or Wraith whose powers don't directly help them in a chase. Also, if you combine this with the Enduring perk, pallets will just be no problem to you. You'll just run right through them. So given the direct impact this perk has on your chase times, I do believe it warrants it being in the A tier. So next perk is Save the Best for Last, and if you completely ignore your obsession during the game and just hit other survivors, you can get up to a 40% cooldown reduction on your attacks, which can very quickly end your chases. So I do think this perk is very powerful and definitely belongs in the A tier for time management. So next perk is Goes the Weasel. This perk, when you get a hook, allows you to kick a generator and instantly regress it by 25%, which is very strong, buys you a lot of time during the game, lets you kill a lot more and not have to worry so much about generators getting popped. So when it comes to time management, this is an awesome perk, definitely A tier for this perk. So next perk is Play with Your Food, and I would think that this perk would almost be overpowered if it weren't for the fact that it only gives you tokens if you are tunneling one survivor, and you can't actually kill that survivor. The obsession, you have to let them live to get your Play with Your Food stacks, which can waste some time if you're trying to stack this up because there is a cooldown between getting those tokens, and also when you attack a survivor with your melee, it also expends one token, so you have to earn it back. So I think this perk is really strong if you're using a killer that doesn't rely on their main attack too much, like Hillbilly or the Cannibal. Otherwise, I'd probably put it in the C tier. It's probably build or killer specific for it to be really strong. So next perk is Overcharged, and I think this is a great perk for time management. If you kick a generator, you can get some regression if the survivor misses a skill check, which they usually do miss a skill check. And on some killers, this perk is better than others, such as Hillbilly or Nurse, who can get around the map very quickly and kick those generators. So yeah, I mean, I do think this is a great perk. Sometimes you might want to run this over Hex Ruin if you're scared that your totem's going to get broken. Yeah, this can be a very great perk if you're having trouble with generators popping too quickly. So for that reason, it's going in the A tier. So next perk is Monitor and Abuse, and this perk is great. It gives you a reduced terror radius, but also increases your field of view, and that should not be underestimated. I've done a little comparison here for you guys, so you can see the field of view advantage you get from running a perk like Monitor and Abuse. You'll be able to find survivors a lot easier out of chases, since Monitor and Abuse's field of view advantage goes away during a chase. But if you're trying to look for survivors doing a generator and you're not in a chase, this perk will be very useful. Also, the reduced terror radius will let you get closer to survivors and reduce the chase times you ultimately end up having with them. So for that reason, it's going into the A tier. So next perk is Make Your Choice, and this perk can single-handedly win you games by acting as sort of a mini No One Escapes Death. This can trigger like once every minute if you keep hooking people, and it lasts for a minute as well. So even if you decide not to go back for the survivor that unhooked whoever you did hook, the fact that they have the exposed status on them forces that survivor to play very cautiously. In some cases, they won't even try and repair generators, which is very time saving. And if you do go back and you get that one shot on the survivor, well then that's additional pressure you put on the survivor team. It's a potentially sacrifice. Yeah, so for that reason, this is a very powerful perk. I'm gonna be putting this in the S tier. So next perk is Knockout, and this is kind of cool. It hides down survivors from their teammates. They don't see their auras. However, the problem with this perk is the fact that there are Survive with Friends groups, and they can just tell each other where they are. Also, there are perks like Bond and Empathy, which can show auras even with this perk equipped. So for that reason, it's not particularly useful unless you're running a specific slugging build, which isn't too popular. So it's probably a C tier perk. Up next is Hex Ruin, and this is without a doubt one of the most powerful perks in the game. It forces the survivors to prioritize finding your totem over completing the generators, essentially stalling out the game for you. And in the case where they can't find your totem, they'll have to power through those skill checks, which are pretty difficult. So just for the fact that it buys the killer so much time, it's going into the S tier. And next perk we have is Hex Haunted Ground. This is a very powerful perk on killers who can land first hits very easily. Once the totem gets cleansed, all of the survivors will have to play very conservatively to prevent themselves from getting one-shot by you. So for that reason, because of how it can sort of stall out the game until those 60 seconds are up, it's going into the A tier. Next perk is Franklin's Demise, and I've been using this a lot more since the healing changes in the balance update I mentioned earlier. With self-care being used less and medkits being used more, not having a medkit makes survivors a lot more nervous about getting hit. Also, they'll go and look for that medkit, which is going to take extra time, which will prolong the game. Also, it's great if the survivors bring a lot of flashlights or toolboxes. That also prolongs the game as well. So for that reason, just given how much time it can waste in survivors' games, it's definitely going into the A tier. Next we have Enduring, and this perk is amazing for chases. You can disrespect any pallet, swing right through them, and potentially get a hit or a down. Also, Decisive Strike is a lot easier to deal with when you run this perk, so for that reason, just given how much time it can save you, it's going into the A tier. Next we have Dying Light, and this is a pretty interesting perk. If you tunnel and kill your obsession, the entire survivor team will have a massive debuff on them. Sometimes this can work really well, other times the survivors know that you're camping your obsession, and then they just do generators anyways before he finally dies on the hook, and then it's less useful. So I mean, it kind of depends on how well things go. I do think it's useful by itself, so I'm just going to put it in the B tier. So next perk is Brutal Strength, and if you're a killer that likes to eat pallets for breakfast, like Wraith or Trapper, this is the perfect perk for you. I do think this has a direct impact on your chase times and can be a difference between getting a kill and getting looped again, so for that reason it's going into the A tier. So next perk is Bloodhound, and while this is a pretty good tracking perk, it's not especially useful for killers outside of Nurse and Spirit. You can rely on the scratch marks and the grunts of pain in order to find survivors pretty easily. So this is more just like a wasted perk slot in my opinion, outside of those two killers, so for that reason it's going into the C tier. So next perk is Blood Warden, and this perk can completely turn the tide of the game if you hook a survivor after the exit gates are opened. However, that is a big if. Sometimes you'll hook the survivor before the gate is open and then nothing happens. So given how big the condition is for this perk to activate, I do think it's more of a B tier perk. So next up is Bamboozle, and this is a fantastic perk for shortening your chase times, especially for killers whose power doesn't directly help them in a chase like Wraith, Trapper, and Myers. So given how much time this can save you, it forces survivors to find another loop. This is going into the A tier. Next we have Bitter Murmur, and this is an amazing perk. It shows you the auras of survivors after they complete a generator or after they complete all the generators, which can sometimes be the difference between getting a kill and not getting a kill. And knowing the direction in which survivors are running after they complete a generator can save you a lot of time since you know where they're going. So for those reasons, it's going into the A tier. So next perk is Barbeque Chili, and this is one of the most used perks in the game for killers. It gives additional blood points for hooking survivors, and also gives you wall hacks on survivors who are outside 40 meters of the hook. And this is very useful for finding down survivors at the end of the game. Also just useful for knowing where to go and where to patrol after hooking a survivor. Also, the additional blood points that this perk gives you allows you to farm the best add-ons for your killer, giving you advantages in your future games, so for that reason it's going into the S tier. Up next is Agitation, and this is a fairly popular perk. It makes sure that you always get your hook on a survivor. However, since the recent changes that BHVR has been doing, they've been adding hooks in certain areas where they weren't there before, which kind of makes this perk less necessary than it used to be. I'm probably going to be putting it in the B tier. And lastly, we have Nurse's Calling, which allows you to see survivors who are healing up. This has been indirectly buffed by the balance changes, which have forced survivors to take more time to heal themselves, and it's especially powerful on killers with small terror radiuses, so for that reason it's probably going into the S tier. So thanks for watching. I do know this video was a little long, but hopefully you got some good information out of it, and if you like it, make sure to subscribe for future content.